Well, good day, my friends. Welcome back. I hope everybody had a happy Christmas and a Merry New Year. Today's video is going to be revisiting the last video on this 2005 RM-Z450. And I know where we left it off was I wasn't 100% sure whether or not I was going to do anything with it, but I just can't let them go. So I was able to find all the parts at a reasonable price to potentially put this bike back together. So now, just to recap, this thing had a blown apart crankshaft that took out the cases, took out the transmission, took out the cylinder, took out the piston, took out all the valves. So other than the casting of the head, this thing pretty much needed everything. I was able to piece everything together using the auction site. After weeding through all the ads, I was actually able to find some stuff on the face-based marketplace, and we'll go through what I picked up coming up. Stay tuned. So this whole thing is turning out to sort of be like a challenge for myself to see if I can piece this thing back together as inexpensively as possible and get it running again. And I'll go through what we got. So I ended up getting a used piston and cylinder. I was told the piston was low hour, and I pulled the rings out and put them in the cylinder, and the gap is on the tighter end, so they're really good, very much in spec, and the piston's in very, very good condition. So the cylinder itself is also very good condition, decent cross hatching. I picked up a whole set of kibble white valves, intake and exhaust. These bad boys are pretty. New timing chain, very, very important. Nothing to do with the engine, but I'm going to go ahead and throw a new drive chain. And also got a set of front and rear sprockets new. This is not race stuff, my friends. This is heavy steel, but it's going to be better than what we had in there. Chain glider, chain guide for the swing arm was missing. Got a set of front and rear wheel bearings and seals. Last but not least, we got a bottom end, complete bottom end. Supposedly has a new Wiseco crankshaft in it, although it feels like it really is tight to rotate. The rod itself is nice and loose, but the case is split still. So I don't know if when they put it back together, they were not able to get the cases to close up without the right tool. They didn't put it in properly. I don't know, but we're going to rip this apart and see why this whole assembly is a little tight. Got another nice side cover here. It's in good shape. Cleaner than what I've got, so I may end up using that. Before I put this back together, I'm going to go ahead and take this oil pump out and take a good look at that. What we're going to use here is a crankcase separating tool so we don't damage the crankshaft. Now the gears are out. This is spinning nice and free now, so I just want to pull this apart and take a look at the transmission and make sure everything's in there properly as it should be. So this one's going to push on the crankshaft, and then you'll just triangulate these so that they're across from each other and support the case. Critical thing on this is be sure that all your bolts are out because you could potentially crack the case trying to get this apart if it's still bolted in. So what this does is it holds the outer case, and it's going to push on the crankshaft to pull the crankshaft through the bearing. As this bearing is somewhat of a pressed fit. Just lightly tapping on our shafts to make sure that they slide through the bushings. Check our oil screen while we're in here, very clean. Check all our bearings. Everything feels real nice. Alright, transmission feels good. She's all back in. So if we look down the case here, the very center, you can see that the connecting rod is right in the center. So I know that this crankshaft is seated all the way against this bearing. If it wasn't, we would have to use a tool like this that actually grabs onto the end of the crankshaft, and as you tighten it, it will pull the crankshaft in without damaging the crankshaft or the bearing. This one's made by Alpha Moto. I think it was like 45 bucks. Other manufacturers make it too, Motion Pro and stuff like that. You can find them on the Jungle website. The connecting rod does say Wiseco on it. I don't really know the situation with this. I don't know if they just couldn't get it back together and gave up on it or what, but the bottom end's actually in really good shape. At this point, we got our gasket on. We make sure we have absolutely everything in here. Washers, spacers, everything that needs to be in here. We can go ahead and put the cases together. Now, ideally, you'd want to freeze your crankshaft, and we would heat our bearing. And the reason we do this, when you heat things up, they expand. When you cool things down, they shrink. Fellas, you might know what I'm talking about. So we cool the crankshaft, it shrinks. We heat the crank bearing, it expands, everything slides together super nice. Before you put it together, lube all your bearings. If any need to be replaced, do it now. So I'm not going to be able to freeze the crankshaft, so what I'm going to do is just heat the bearing, and hopefully it slides together. If not, we'll have to use our tool. We're going to heat the inner race. seeing a little smoke. She's warm. Let's see if we can get this together. One of my bolts is bent pretty good, so I'm glad I have another set up. Just going to be 100% sure. There she is, bottomed out. Should pull in fairly easily because of this little lip in here for the cam chain guide. I just put a socket on the other side just to balance it out. If it's really tight and it doesn't want to pull in, don't keep pushing on it, so we don't want to break anything. But I just felt her bottom out, so I know we're good. So at this point now, crankshaft spins nice and free. Transmission feels great, spins nice and free. Check to make sure that she goes through all the gears. There's neutral. Second, third, and fourth. Awesome. Transmission feels great. Next order of business, we'll put this side back together. Don't be afraid to use a little oil putting these things back together. Now the nut on this tightens counterclockwise, and obviously it comes off clockwise. Reverse thread. While we're in here, we'll take a look at this oil pump. Looks very good, nice and clean. For the Kickstarter to line up properly on the outside of the bike, this has to be assembled properly. So what you're looking for is on the end of the kickstart shaft, you have a punch mark. And then when you put this on, there's also a punch mark. If you can see that right there. So it's fairly simple. Just line those two punch marks up. And when you put it back together, it will line up perfectly. Little trick to getting these gaskets to stay sometimes is dielectric grease. Just stick a little bit in the little groove here and there, and it'll hold your gasket in. She ain't coming out. I'm going to go ahead and use this clutch cover. Looks good. This doesn't have any dowel pins, so you could technically use a little bit of this black RTV on it just to kind of hold it in place if you had to. I'm not going to go ahead and put an oil filter element in here right now, as while I'm very confident that this is good, once I get the piston and cylinder on, I'm going to spin the crankshaft and see if I can build some oil pressure before I put it together, or at least make sure the oil's pumping. So at this point, we have a complete bottom end. Now we can start putting the top end together. We'll put a rag to put our other clip so it doesn't fall down inside the crankcase. Because like Tom Jones says, it's not unusual. You want to make sure that that ring is seated in that groove completely, so it doesn't walk out and damage anything. Now that we got our bottom end where we want it, we're going to start working on this head. Go ahead and get the valves lapped in, get the new valve seals put in, and springs and everything put back together. Boy, it's time I invest in a actual Dremel tool, I believe. This thing just has no power. Alright, so now we're going to do our valve grinding, also known as lapping. What it is basically an abrasive compound that we'll put on the face of the valve, and we'll rub it back and forth until it seats on the seat, basically. This way we know what our valve job looks like. This stuff is extremely abrasive, so once we get done with this procedure, we're going to want to clean this head out really well. Put a little bit of oil in the valve guides. Make it easier for the valve to move. These lapping spindles have certainly seen better days. The rubber on the suction cups are getting a little bit hard. So if we look on the valve here, this is one that's not been done. There is a small, faint gray line, and that's where the valve is actually contacting the seat. Ideally, you want to have this right in the middle of the face. This is not too bad. We'll go ahead and do the rest of them. Now let's get this head over to the parts washer and get all this abrasive out of here. Well, now that our head is all cleaned up, we'll go ahead and put our new valve seals. Kibble White sends a set here. They're all blue. Generally, when you get valve seals, they're going to be brown and green. Now the brown is going to go to the intake, and the green will go towards the exhaust normally. So the valve shafts are exactly the same size, so it won't matter which way they go. Take a little 1/4 inch extension here right on the valve head, and we'll tap these a little bit to seat them before we start working on our shimming. We'll clean and polish up these journals just a little bit. While it's not perfect, it should survive another round. When I took this apart, if you remember, the camshaft had a little bit of aluminum on it from the head, and that's a lack of lubrication. The camshaft is very hard, so I just took a file and I was able to get the aluminum off of it, and then just a red Scotch-Brite pad just to clean it up. If you've watched any of my other videos, you've seen me do this a bunch of times, so I'm not going to draw this one out. I'll go ahead and get these shimmed up, and then we'll get the head back on it. Alright, we're ready to put this head back on. Little tip, go ahead and throw yourself a zip tie around your timing chain. Make it easy for you to recover it if it drops down, which it will. once you got all your bolts in, just go ahead and throw your impact on it and crank it right down. No, actually don't do that. What we want to do is torque these in a cross pattern. Suzuki says to initially torque these to 18 foot-pounds and then go back again and do it to 33. Now I'll just smash these down to like 7 foot-pounds. Yep, that's it. Yep, 7-ish. Yep, 7-ish. Put a screwdriver down the cylinder hole, and then I can rotate the crankshaft back and forth until I find top dead center, which would be right before it starts going down in either direction. So we'll get our camshaft for the exhaust installed. There's a punch mark that's going to line right up with your head. So with our piston at top dead center, this side of the timing chain tight, that punch mark should line right up with the top of the cylinder head. Next, our intake cam has 2 punch marks as well, and it's going to be the same thing. This one will line up with the cylinder head pretty close, but what we want to see is from this top punch mark on the exhaust to the top punch mark on the intake, you want 15 pins exactly. Double check you're still on top dead center, check your timing marks, and then count 15 pins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 lines right up with this punch mark. Once I put the tensioner in, I just usually go ahead and do a couple of full rotations on the engine, and then recheck my timing marks. Perfect. Well, doing the time lapse of the reassembly, my SD card filled up and didn't notify me, so you missed the time lapse of that. Boo-hoo, right? Not a big deal, but in the meantime, I got all this button back up on the engine. I replaced the chain and sprockets, front and rear wheel bearings. At this point now, we're going to put some gas in it and see if this thing will fire off. I don't know if I need to do anything with the carburetor. The fuel in the tank smelled pretty nasty and had a yellow tinge to it. So might have been sitting for a little while. I don't really know, but all our fluids are topped off. Everything's plugged in. Let's put some fuel in it, see if we can get this thing to bark at least. In case you're wondering what kind of fuel, this is the non-ethanol variety. You should try to use this any chance you get, if you can get it. Sometimes they call it wreck fuel. Alright, she's squirting fuel. Fingers crossed. Well, she doesn't sound too bad. She's taking gas and everything else. Obviously, we're probably going to need to repack the exhaust, and the head pipe's not super tight, so could have a little popping back. It's not a big deal, but she sounds good. I think we're going to be all right with the carburetor. I'm going to go ahead and put it back together the rest of the way and take this thing out for a little test ride. Well, that's going to do it for this one. I took it for a rip up and down the road, and she got a ton of power and runs pretty good. It does need a little bit of minor tweaking here and there as the idle's kind of all over the place, but she's back alive again. I know it's kind of a long video, but I appreciate you guys watching very much. If you got any comments, leave them down in the box. But I appreciate a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and a subscription would really help my channel. Thanks again, my friends, and we'll see you on the next adventure.